X Los Angeles Classic Review. Let's chat about it. Hey friends, what's going on? John here from What's Spitting. I'm continuing to do records that are classic this week. If you missed my Smashing Pumpkins, Guided by Voices, or Beck reviews, go back and check them out, because tonight I'm here to chat about the legendary debut album from California punk rock band X. Punk rock outfit X. Now, this is their debut record, and it's a record that I discovered in my late teens. And at the time, I don't want to say that I wasn't that crazy about a lot of punk, but I certainly was very iffy on classic punk. This was years before I would go down the rabbit hole of Dead Kennedys and Gorilla Biscuit and Descendants and more. As a matter of fact, at the time, I was much more into classic rock and grunge, which there's nothing wrong with that. But around that time, X's Los Angeles got passed my way, and it was in and for me it truly was a first listen love. I mean, the pure rage and urgency on this record at the time blew my damn mind. Not only were X writing tracks that hit hard emotionally and mentally, they were also really catchy. This album kicks off and wastes absolutely no time with your phones off the hook, but you're not. I mean, this track just starts off with such a classic punk riff. Get used to me saying that. So much of this album just has riffs that really stick with you. Real earworms. And for an album called Los Angeles from a band from California, this is a very New York punk sounding track, but it is a mission statement for this entire record. The urgency here is wild. And Exene's performance on this entire track is absolutely thunderous, especially her cries during the chorus. Then we have Johnny Hit and Run Pauline, one of the most brutal and real track to come out of the 80s camp of punk. Don't be fooled by its Chuck Berry-esque Johnny B. Good sounding riff. I mean, everything about this track is very in your face. And yeah, it's not for the faint of heart, as it dives into sexual assaults. It is an anti-rape anthem if I've ever heard one. And it really doesn't hold back, like, at all. John Doe's performance on this cut is one of his most commanding on this entire record. And it's once again done with so much urgency, this album demands to be heard. Then we have Soul Kitchen, which is a Doors cover, and an awesome one at that. I should take a second to point out here, Ray Manzarek of the Doors fame actually produced this entire record, as well as other X albums, but also played keyboards on this thing. Now, growing up a fan of a lot of classic rock, the Doors actually meant quite a bit to me. They still do, and I've always thought that this cover is really fascinating, just really fantastic by every stretch of the imagination. I mean, the Doors are not an easy band to cover, but X truly did make this track their own. I mean, Exene's performance on this track, it's jaw-dropping. She sounds exhausted, but in the best way. It's intense, it's got this unbelievable guitar solo, and it fits this album. Nausea, on the other hand, is a little bit more slower paced and a lot more calculating. I love the rough and tumble riff that we get here, as well as Ray Manzarek's keyboards floating through the background. That gives this track this really zany, sort of polarizing feel to it. Exene's performance is also shockingly commanding. Everything about this track just hits so hard. But I've always respected this cut, as it's a very unique, very different flavor of the band, especially right in the middle of these very fast-paced, very urgent, demanding to be heard punk tunes. But the amount of swagger and attitude on display here does still make this a punk tune. I freaking love Sugar Light too. This has always been one of my favorite deep cuts here. I love the way that this track just kind of takes off with this really memorable riff and just does not look back. It's chaotic, and I do very much so enjoy John Doe's very shaky, very charismatic performance on this track. It's pretty electric, pun intended. It's a little sweaty. There's some great guitar solos again. It's a great reminder of what X can do. It's really catchy too. We also have Los Angeles, this album's title track. Few tracks from X are more infamous than this one, from the legendary guitar riff to the in-your-face performances all around. I personally have always loved how full throttle this track is, and the back and forth vocals between Exene and John just come off really classy. And yeah, it is one of the more straightforward tracks here. but it still has that very grimy 80s punk underbelly to it. It's an awesome track. Sex and Dying in High Society, one of the most necessary cuts here, probably my favorite deep cut as well. It's one of the more explosive cuts here, from the throttling verses to the semi-euphoric chorus. Yeah, that chorus is also powered by the very shimmering, very glitzy keyboards of Ray Manzarek. And lyrically, it doesn't pull any punches. A lot of these tracks really don't. And once again, I've always felt like John Doe and Exene on a track like this play off each other masterfully. Now, if I had to choose one track here that I've just never really been that into, sadly, it's the Unheard Music. Now, earlier on Nausea, X do a great job of trying a more calculating, slow-paced sound and making it their own and sounding great doing it. But I've just kind of never really vibed with this cut. Now, lyrically, it still is pretty ruthless. It shows the band pushing further down the very real rabbit hole. It's very necessary in that respect. But I don't know, I've just never been a fan of this whole piece together. But boy, oh boy, do they ever knock it out of the park with The World's a Mess, It's in My Kiss. My favorite track on this entire record, single or otherwise. I mean, there's always been a sort of old school 50s rock and roll feel to this record, and it's not any more prevalent than this track here. But it's also a pretty ambitious cut. A lot of the tracks on this album barely scratch the 2-minute and 20-second mark. This one's almost 5 minutes. It's a swirling punk wonderland of vocals that sound like it's a cry for help, but also we get these really intense riffs and insane keyboards. As a matter of fact, we get a full 1.5-minute keyboard solo from Ray, and it sounds amazing. As a matter of fact, it's one of the most badass things about this record. Yeah, this album rules. I mean, if you're a fan of punk from any generation, I'd recommend you listen to this. And if you're like me and just, are having some issues getting into classic punk rock, give this thing a listen. It is 27 minutes. It is raw. It is urgent. It is super catchy, and it sounds great. But let me know what you all think about this record. Got one more classic review coming for you this week, and you're not going to want to miss it. See you soon.